I think there's been no lessons learned from the past process that we have gone through. And I will tell you why, because I think that the Minister of Finance and Treasury has been engaged in what can be described as malicious and deceptive consultation. And no one is there having that conversation, because when the minister opened here virtually, he reflects on the withdrawal of the 0.5% VAT increase. The DG does so as well, but no one speaks about the context as to what led to that. So there's two contexts, one which I'll call a factual context and one which I will call a fictional context, which is a result of deceptive consultation. The factual context is that the Western Cape High Court suspended the 0.5% value-added tax increases and set aside the 2025 fiscal framework and revenue proposals due to a court intervention. That is the first reliable, verifiable, and judicially binding context. The second fictional context, which is a product of deceptive consultation, is that the VAT increases were set aside as a result of proposals of alternative revenue generation mechanisms and consultation from political parties. The second one is fictional because there is no inclusion in this budget of anyone's alternative revenue generation mechanism. No political party, no stakeholder that we met with, not the Parliamentary Budget Office, none of their submissions in terms of alternative revenue generation mechanisms are included here. The VAT increase has been substituted by a fuel levy, an increase in the fuel levy. That is the first point that I want to make. And I'd like to get an answer as to why exactly do we not have, because some of us who read the court papers saw that the Minister of Finance thanked everyone for making proposals for alternative revenue generation mechanisms, but they were not feasible in the interim and they would be considered in the next budget. This is the next budget. They are not here. I'm not sure which next budget he was speaking to. The second point I'd like to make is that there's been no conceptual change between the budget between February, March, and the one we're looking at now, because the one that was supposed to be presented in February, which we all got to look at, ring-fenced us to three options in terms of revenue. That is continued borrowing, that is continued austerity, or what was called strategic tax adjustments. So because the strategic tax adjustment of value-added tax has been defeated, there has been a continuation of strategic tax adjustments in the fuel levy and the non-adjustment of personal income tax brackets. So regressive taxation remains in place as a mechanism to generate revenue. But you didn't leave it there. You combine it with austerity in the same way that the Treasurer General of the EFF has described, that your expenditure is not in line with inflation, and that you're also making numerical cuts to specific departments, basic education, health, defense, community services as well. So it shows that the consultations that were had in the previous process were meaningless, and the manner in which we're proceeding now shows that there's been some consensus reached somewhere, that there is an arrogance and a confidence that this budget will pass regardless of our objections. Because the EFF was not consulted, and if there was broader-based consultation with political parties based on lessons learned from the past process, it would have been evident that we would oppose a fuel levy. It would have been extremely evident. So those are some of the issues that we'd like to raise, and we'd want answers to where are the alternative revenue generation mechanisms which were claimed to have led to the scrapping of the VAT increases, and why is there no adjustment to personal income tax brackets to protect our people from bracket creep? The third issue I think I'd like to raise relates to the Division of Revenue Bill. We sat within the Standing Committee on Appropriations with the Honorable Maiman as well, and made proposals of adjustments that need to be made in terms of the equitable share. And that related to the fact that the allocation to local government, which is substantially less, and I hear now it's 9.7%, an increase from 9.5%, which is not going to be helpful as well, is that local government is at the coal face of service delivery, yet it continues to receive the least allocation. And this is based on the assumptions that municipalities will be inherently resilient because they will generate revenue from paying of water and property rates. but it doesn't take into consideration that the resilience of local municipalities depends on apartheid spatial planning. So you cannot compare a rural and township municipality that is dominated by unemployed or low-wage people to a suburb and compare that resilience and say that municipalities should inherently all be resilient and be able to generate their own self-sustainable revenue. That was one of the logics that we said should underpin an increased allocation of money to local government sphere as opposed to the national government sphere. That is not reflected anywhere here. Why is that? What is the logic that underpins the allocation of money substantially more to national and provincial government and less to municipal government, whereas municipal government is where service delivery exists? That is the second point. And I think we should get a response on that as well. There's much more detailed and specific budget cuts that we're going to speak to, but I think those are the two areas that we must speak to as well. I think lastly, the growth forecast has been revised down to 1.4%, predictably, because the last time we met here as well, we said that the growth forecast mechanisms of National Treasury are not reliable. And now we're beginning to suspect that you just overestimate your growth forecast to assure markets, but also to justify austerity, so that at the end of the year, you expect to generate an amount of revenue based on the growth forecast. Then you always revise it down when the time comes and austerity has already been implemented. What should make us continue to rely on the growth projections that are being presented here, which are continuously being revised down? The last one was 1.8% when we met. It's now 1.4%. The International Monetary Fund expects South Africa's growth projection to be at 1%, if not less. So who must we rely on? Why is the modeling of National Treasury inconsistent with global institutions and economic institutes with experts? Where are the inconsistencies? So I think we're revisiting some of these conversations, and the chair spoke to that perhaps we've had some of them in the previous budget, but there's change in context and there's change in figures. So I think it's important that we speak to that as well. I think I'll leave it there, Chair, for now. Thank you.